The phone buzzed on the nightstand, that annoying little vibration that seems to know exactly when you have finally closed your eyes. Frank Calder grunted, reached over with a stiff ARM, and squinted at the bright screen. A text message from his daughter-in-law, Vanessa. That was unusual. Shira Rely texted him unless she needed something, and even then, it was always through his son, Derek. He opened the message, expecting a reminder about some family dinner he was not invited to anyway, or maybe a passive-aggressive note about him being late with a birthday gift for one of the grandchildren he was Rely allowed to see. Instead, there was a string of attachments. Bank statements. Old ones, from a joint account he had closed over a decade ago. The account he had set up with his late wife, Eleanor, to manage the modest inheritance she had received from her own parents. It was not a fortune, not by Wall Street standard RDS, but it was hers. Her safety net. Her just-in-case money, as she used to call it. Frank's thumb hovered over the screen. Is he RT beginning to thud with a slow, heavy dread? The first statement was from 3 months after Eleanor passed. He remembered that time like it was yesterday. The fog of grief, the endless paperwork, the hollow silence of the house. He had been so lost, so crippled by the loss of the woman he had read 42 years with, that he had trusted Derek to handle the financial loose ends. Derek, his only son, the Ivy League graduate, the successful entrepreneur, the golden boy who could do no wrong in his mother's eyes. Frank had signed the papers without a second thought, his vision blurred with TRS, his signature a shaky scrawl. He had assumed the money, about $82,000 RS as he recalled, had been rolled into the joint household account, or perhaps put into a trust for the grandchildren. He had never asked. He had never wanted to. Talking about Eleanor's money felt like commodifying her memory, like putting a price tag on her love. He had let it go, let it dissolve into the background noise of life. But now, STA ring at Vanessa's accidental text. He saw the numbers. The initial balance was there, $82,347 RS and 82 cents. And then, line by line, the withdrawals. First, $5,000 RS to a company called Derek C. Holdings, a name Frank had never heard of. The next month, another $3,000. Then a $15,000 transfer labeled investment opportunity. Then, in the same month, an $8,000 debit to PA Radish Travel Agency. Frank's throat tightened. He scrolled down, his arthritic fingers clumsy on the glass. The withdrawals continued, month after month, until the balance was almost completely drained. The final statement, the one that closed the account, showed a leftover amount of just $1,200 RS. He felt the blood drain from his face. His hand trembled, and the phone slipped from his grip, landing softly on the quilt. He read at the ceiling, his mind racing through a decade of conversations, of subtle hints, of guilt trips and financial advice. He remembered Derek's serious face, the furrowed brow, the concerned tone. Dad, you need to be careful with your money. The market is volatile. I am looking out for you. He remembered Vanessa's sighs, the way she would look at Derek with that pitying expression, as if Frank were a child who could not be trusted with a piggy bank. They had painted him as a fool, a senile old man who was going to blow through his savings and end up a burden on them. They had limited his visits with his grandchildren, citing concerns about his stability. They had stopped inviting him to family holidays, claiming he was too negative and bringing down the mood. All the while, they had been systematically siphoning the last tangible piece of Eleanor that he had left at his grief, which he had thought had dulled to a manageable ache over the RS. ROA read back with a fresh, sharp agony. It was not just about the money. It was about the betrayal. It was about Eleanor's memory being used, desecrated, turned into a loot box for his own son's greed. He thought about the last conversation he had had with her, just days before the stroke took her. She had squeezed his hand, her voice a frail whisper. Frank, take care of yourself. Take care of our boy. He is all we have. He had tried so hard. And Derek had repaid him by stealing from his dead mother. Frank sat up slowly, his joints protesting. He put his feet on the worn parapet and took a deep breath, the stale air of his small, single-story house filling his lungs. The walls of this place, a modest retirement bungalow, seemed to close in on him. He had chosen to downsize after Eleanor died, thinking it was the responsible thing to do. Derek had encouraged it, of course. Dad, you do not need a big house anymore. Think of the maintenance. Think of the equity. You can invest it, live more comfortably. That was another one of their schemes, he now realized. They had wanted him small, contained, and easily controlled. He looked around the room. The worn-out recliner, the stack of Western novels on the side table, the framed photo of Eleanor on the mantel. She was smiling, her dark hair still touched with gray, her eyes sparkling with that mischievous light she had always had. She would have been furious. She would have urged right over to Derek's fancy development in the suburbs and slapped him silly. She had never stood for any nonsense from anyone, especially not their son, but Frank was not Eleanor. Frank was quiet, introverted, a retired mechanical engineer. He had spent his career designing systems that no one ever saw, components for agricultural machinery that made the farms of the Midwest run more efficiently. He was the kind of man people looked right through. A nobody. A background figure. That is what Derek and Vanessa thought, anyway. He picked the phone up again, his fingers now steady, his mind sharpening with a cold, focused clarity. He scrolled back through the statements, meticulously calculating the total. Over the course of 3 years, the account had been drained. $82,000. Every last cent that Eleanor's parents had worked their whole lives to leave their daughter. Every bit of security she had hoped to pass on to her grandchildren. Gonda, what had it been spent on? He went back to the travel agency. PA Ratus. That sounded like their vacations. The ones they had always been too busy to take him on. The ones they posted pictures of on social media, him and his son, lounging on a beach in Bermuda, while he sat alone in his bungalow, eating a frozen dinner. He felt a surge of bile rise in his throat. He had been lonely, so desperately lonely. He had called Derek on one of those trips, just wanting to hear his voice. Derek had answered, sounded annoyed, and told him he was in a meeting. But the background noise was Clea Rly Pool Pa Rudy. Frank had never said a word. He had just apologized and hung up, swallowing the knot of hurt. He was a polite man, a man of few demands. And they had taken that quietness, that innate decency, and weaponized it against him. They had rolled over him like a tide, and he had let them dot, but now he had something. His thumb hovered over the screen capture button. He took screenshots, dozens of them, documenting everything. He saved them to a folder. Then he read at Vanessa's text. It was just a string of attachments. No message, no explanation. It was an accident, a pure, beautiful accident. The universe, maybe, or his Eleanor, finally giving him the ammunition he needed. He did not confront them right away. He knew better than that. He had seen how they operated. If he called them, they would spin some story. They would say it was a misunderstanding, that the money was for essential business expenses related to the estate. They would accuse him of misremembering, of being confused. They would gaslight him into submission. No. He needed a plan. He needed to understand the full scope of their deception. He was an engineer, after all. He solved problems. He dissected systems. And this was the biggest, most personal problem he had ever faced. He got out of bed, his legs feeling surprisingly strong. He walked to his small, cluttered study and fired up his old desktop computer. The screen flickered, and he waited for it to boot up, the hum of the fan the only sound in the silent house. He felt a strange energy coursing through him. It was not just anger, though that was a potent fuel. It was a sense of purpose, a drive he had not felt since Eleanor was alive. He was done being the old man in the corner. He was done being a doormat. It was time to find out who his son really was, and what he had done with his mother's money. He route to CRCH by looking up Derek C. Holdings. The results were immediate and damning. It was not a successful route-up, as he had always been led to believe. It was a defunct limited liability company, registered to his own home address, an address Derek and Vanessa had never lived at. It had been used for one thing, and one thing only, to siphon money from his mother's account. The pattern was clear. The scam was amateur, but effective, because the target was a grieving old man who trusted his son. Frank leaned back in his chair, a grim smile on his face. "All right, son," he muttered to the empty room. "Let us see just how deep this rabbit hole goes." He spent the next hour sea-urching through public records, his fingers moving with a new determination. Every click of the mouse, every new document he found, confirmed what he already suspected. His son was not a successful businessman. He was a fraud, a predator who had been feeding on the people who loved him most. And Frank, the quiet engineer who had trusted his family, was finally ready to fight back. He was not the same man who had signed those papers in a haze of grief. He was a man with a mission, a man with a plan, and a man who was about to turn his son's world upside down. Over the next week, Frank transformed. He did not leave the house, except for short trips to the grocery store for a raton of milk and some bread. He sat at his computer, the cold light of the monitor illuminating his face for hours on end. He combed through public records, tax liens, property assessments, and business filings. It was all out there, hidden in plain sight. He just had to dig. He had never been a tech wizard, but he was a methodical man, and he had time. He had all the time in the world now. He discovered Derek's world was not what it seemed. The successful consulting firm that had impressed everyone at his college reunion was a part-time gig that had folded 5 years ago. The real estate investments Vanessa bragged about at the country club were a single rental property that was rely covering its own mortgage. The new sport utility vehicle, the expensive kitchen remodel, the children's private school tuition, it was all built on credit, on lies, and on that $82,000 RS Frank had signed away. What he did not find was any sign of money coming back. No investment returns. No profits. The money had simply been consumed. It was a hole they had filled by draining him, and then, he suspected, by draining others. He found a few hints of that, too, small kindnesses his son had shown to others that looked an awful lot like a predator casing a potential Maarke. He was a parazit that had been feeding on the people who loved him most. But Frank was also a man of hidden depths. A side of his life he had never read with his son, a side that had root after Eleanor passed. To combat the loneliness, the crushing silence of his empty home, he had root going to the senior center downtown. Not for the bingo or the shuffleboard, but for the woodshop. He had been a whiz with his hands as a young man, a skill he had lost in his years behind a desk. He rediscovered it in that dusty workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and the gentle hum of the lathe. He made toys for the local children's hospital, intricate birdhouses, and beautifully reved canes for the veterans at the NEARBYVA home. His work had a simple, honest beauty to it. Soon, the director of the center, a RPI'd woman named Soleil, had suggested he sell some of his pieces at a local artisan market. To his surprise, they had sold like hotcakes. A local gallery owner had seen his work and offered to represent him. One thing led to another, and his hands reved furniture root up a ring in high-end catalogs. His reputation, modest though it was, had grown through word of mouth. He was known in a small, exclusive circle of collectors as the man from the woods who made furniture that was built to last a lifetime, a counterpoint to the cheap, mass-produced junk that filled most homes. Frank had never told Derek about this. What would have been the point? He knew what his son thought of him. He was the retired engineer, the old man in the bungalow, the one who needed managing. Derek would have either dismissed it as a silly hobby or, worse, tried to monetize it. He would have seen it as another resource to exploit. So Frank kept his secret and his modest success to himself. His finances, due to the unexpected income from his craft, were surprisingly healthy. He did not need his son's help, and he certainly did not need his pity. Now, that secret was about to become his most powerful weapon. He could not just call the police. The crime was old, and the statute of limitations might be a problem. Besides, the justice system was slow and messy. He wanted something more immediate. He wanted them to understand what they had done. He wanted to see the look on their faces. His RCH had also turned up something else. Derek and Vanessa had been living way beyond their means. The property on their house, the luxury subdivision, had a second mortgage that was about to balloon. They were drowning. And that, he realized, was their fatal weakness. They were desperate. Frank sat in his study, the mail from the day before sitting in a pile on his desk. A letter from the county clerk's office caught his eye. He opened it and found an assessment notice for the house in the suburbs. It had gone up in value by 30% in the last year. The taxes, too, would be increasing. For a normal family, that would be a problem. For Derek and Vanessa, it was a crisis waiting to explode. Root making calls. Not to lawyers. To his banker. To his accountant. He needed to be absolutely sure of his own financial standing before he made his move. He had to know he had a sturdy foundation to stand on, that his legs would not crumble beneath him when the fight began. The next afternoon, a Friday, he drove to the big bank downtown. He had been a customer there for over 40 years, but he rarely visited the main branch. He usually dealt with the small local branch a few blocks from his house. The manager, a young man named Kevin, greeted him in the lobby, his face a mask of professional concern. Mr. Calder, it is nice to see you. To what do we owe the pleasure? Frank smiled thinly. I need to examine my portfolio, Kevin. All of it. The personal accounts, the retirement funds, the trust accounts, everything. I need a full, itemized statement. I want to know exactly where every cent stands. Kevin blinked. Of course, sir. Right this way. They retreated into a private office. Kevin's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up pages and pages of data. Frank watched the numbers scroll by, his own private knowledge buzzing in his head. The money from his furniture sales, the dividends from his SMART, conservative investments, the Social Security, the modest pension from the engineering firm. It all added up to a very comfortable sum. Nothing flashy, but plenty to live on, and more than enough to help him feel secure. He also spotted a name on his list of financial advisors, a man who had once approached him about investing in a high-growth tech venture. Frank had declined, politely. He always did. It was the same man, he noticed, whose name had read as the advisor for his son's account. The web was weaving itself tighter. He nodded, thanked Kevin, and drove back to his bungalow. He had a plan, a solid one. It was time to pay his son a visit. Not to beg, not to plead. To informed, he put on his best shirt, a clean pair of khakis, and his good leather shoes, the ones he saved for weddings and funerals. He had not been to his son's house in over a year. He drove the well-known route, past the malls and the strip centers, past the coming-soon developments, and into the neatly manicured streets of their subdivision. The house was huge, an imposing beige structure with a red tile roof and a 3C RGA range. The landscaping was immaculate, a testament to the service they hired but could rely afford. He parked his old pickup truck in the driveway, right next to Vanessa's gleaming Audi. He took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was not a confrontational man. He hated scenes. But the thought of Eleanor, of her smile, of the quiet dignity with which she had lived her life, gave him the strength he needed. He walked to the front door and rang the bell. The chimes echoed inside. He heard a yelp from a dog, and then Vanessa's voice, sharp and impatient. Coming. The door swung open. She looked surprised to see him. Her face, refully made up, registered a flash of annoyance before she plastered on a fake smile. Frank, this is a surprise. You should have called. It is important. Vanessa, he said, his voice flat. I need to talk to Derek. Now that he is in his home office. He is very busy. We are preparing for. I do not see what he is preparing for, Frank said, stepping past her into the grand foyer. I need to talk to him, and I am not leaving until we do. She looked taken aback by his firmness. He had never pushed past her before. He had always waited to be invited in. He heard Derek's voice from down the hall. Honey, who is it? It is your father, Dar. He is here. Derek read in the doorway of his study. He was a handsome man, still, with his mother's dark hair and sharp features. He looked at Frank with a mixture of amusement and mild annoyance. Dad, what is going on? Is everything okay? Frank walked past him, into the study. It was a beautiful room, lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that Frank suspected had never been read. On the massive oak desk sat a stack of invoices and bills. Frank walked straight to the desk, sat down in the guest chair, and looked his son in the eye. I know about the money, Derek, he said. Eleanor's money. The account you drained. I have the statements. Derek's face froze. The color drained from his cheeks. Vanessa, who had followed them in, let out a sharp gasp. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. I do not know what you are talking about, Dad, Derek stammered, recovering his composure. That money was for managing your estate. The taxes, the administrative fees. It was all perfectly legal. Do not lie to me, son, Frank said, his voice shaking only slightly. I have every transaction documented. The travel agencies, the company you set up at my address, the monthly withdrawals. It took you 3 years to take everything. $82,000 RS. Your mother's money. It was a joint account. Dad, Vanessa interjected, her voice brittle. We were managing it for you. You signed over the authority. You were struggling. You were not thinking straight. We helped you. Frank looked at her, his eyes cold. You helped me. By taking my wife's inheritance and putting it into your own pockets, by telling me you were managing my money when you were really just taking it. Derek stepped four-way road. Look, Dad, let us not get hysterical. We can work this out. We will pay you back. We just need some time. The payment is not the issue, Frank said, standing up. The issue is the lies. The issue is you treating me like a fool for the last 10 years. You made me out to be a senile old man, and you spent my wife's memory. Vanessa's eyes widened. You cannot prove anything. It was an account you had no oversight of. We will just say you were confused. I have the statements, Frank repeated, pulling out his phone, holding up the screenshots. I have them all. And I have a lawyer who is very interested in looking at them. Derek went pale. You would not. You cannot. We are family. Frank laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Family, you treated me like a stranger. You kept my grandchildren from me. You made me feel like a burden. All for what? To keep up a lifestyle you could not afford. He walked to the door, then turned back. I am giving you one chance, Derek. One. You will pay back every single cent of your mother's money, including interest. You will write a formal apology, a public one, that explains exactly what you did. And you will start treating me with the respect I deserve. If you do not, I will take this to the authorities. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of successful businessman you really are. He left them standing in the study, speechless. He got into his pickup truck and drove away, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He did not feel triumphant. He felt a profound sadness. The man in that study, the one who looked so much like his wife, was a stranger to him. The boy he had raised was gone. But the fight was just beginning. He knew his ultimatum would not work. Derek was too arrogant, too cornered to admit defeat. He would try to fight back. He would try to spin the story, to make Frank look like the crazy old man he was trying to extort his own son. Frank read himself for the battle ahead. He had a feeling the worst was yet to come. Frank's ultimatum had the opposite effect of what he had intended. Instead of crumbling, Derek and Vanessa dug in. A week after their meeting, Frank received a letter from a lawyer. It was a cease and desist order, threatening him with a lawsuit for harassment, defamation, and undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man. The lawyer, Frank noted with a bitter twist, was one of Derek's old college buddies, a man whose reputation in the local legal community was a step above ambulance chaser. It was a desperate bluff. Frank had anticipated something like this. He had expected a fight. He was not a fighter by nature, but he was stubborn. He had designed hydraulic systems that withstood millions of cycles of pressure. He knew something about endurance. He took the letter to his own lawyer, a quiet, sharp woman named Miriam, who specialized in elder law. She was a friend of CLA Roz from the senior center, a woman he trusted. Miriam read the letter, pushed her glasses up her nose, and let out a short, sharp laugh. This is nonsense, she said. They have no case. But it tells me they are SCA red. They should be, Frank said. They will be. But we need to be strategic. We need to present our evidence fully, clear RLY. And we need to be red for a fight in the court of public opinion, too. They are going to try to SMEA are you? I know, Frank said. He was right. Over the next few weeks, his phone root ringing. It was distant relatives, old friends of his wife's, even a few of his neighbors from the old street. The story, of course, was all from Derek's perspective. His poor, aging father was having memory issues. He had become paranoid and irrational. He had been making wild accusations that were very hurtful to the family. The implication was clear. Frank was losing his mind. He was becoming a burden. He was making things up. It was a classic move. SMEA are the accuser. Turn the victim into the villain. Frank felt the sting of it. He had known these people for decades. They had seen him at his best, at his most stable. He had been a quiet, reliable, competent man his whole life. And now, thanks to his son's poison, they were questioning that. But he did not fight it head on. He did not call them up to a review. He did something more effective. He calmly explained the situation to Miriam, and she drafted a simple, factual letter. It was not a rebuttal. It was a statement of events, with copies of the bank statements and the legal filings. It was polite and professional. It did not attack Derek. It just laid out the facts. Let the facts speak for themselves, Frank told her. He is the one with the hole in his story. Let him try to fill it with lies. Miriam sent the letter to everyone on Frank's contact list. It was a quiet, dignified move that spoke volumes. The phone calls from concerned relatives and friends dried up as quickly as they had Sta Root. But Derek was not finished. He Sta Root making overtures. He wanted to make amends, to fix this terrible misunderstanding. He invited Frank to the house for dinner. He left messages, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Dad, I am so sorry about all this. It is all blown out of proportion. Let us just sit down and talk like civilized people. Frank knew it was a trap. He saw through the sudden change of heart. Derek did not want to reconcile. He wanted to get Frank alone, in a controlled environment, and get him to sign something. Maybe even a document saying he had been mistaken. Frank declined, politely but firmly. He was not going to play their game. He was going to play his own. He Sta Root, spending more time at the workshop at the senior center. He found solace in the rhythmic work of the lathe, the feel of the wood grain beneath his hands. He was crafting something new, something bigger than his usual pieces. He was working on a beautiful, intricate cradle for Cla Ra's new granddaughter. It was an act of creation, a balm for his soul. His fellow woodworkers knew something was up. He was quieter than usual, more focused. But they did not pry. They were a respectful bunch. They just handed him a fresh cup of coffee and let him be. One afternoon, a man from the local newspaper came to the center to do a story on the community programs. He was interviewing the director when he noticed Frank's workbench, with its delicate pieces and the half-finished cradle. He was intrigued. He asked Frank if he could take some pictures. Frank, wanting to stay out of the spotlight, initially declined. But Clara gave him a nudge. Frank, it is good publicity for the center. And it is good for you. Show them what you can do. Frank reluctantly agreed. The photographer spent an hour in the workshop, capturing the details of Frank's work. The reporter spent another hour talking to him, asking him about his craft, about the memory of his wife that inspired it. Frank spoke about Eleanor with a quiet reverence, about how she had always encouraged him to create things. He left out the feud with his son entirely. The article came out on the front page of the local section a few weeks later. It was a human interest piece, titled From Blueprint to Beauty, a quiet engineer's second act. It featured a large photo of Frank, his hands stained with sawdust, holding a delicate, handsome red bird. He looked calm, centered, and deeply content. It painted a picture of a man who was the complete opposite of the confused, agitated old man Derek had tried to paint him as. Vanessa saw the article. Frank knew she would. She was the type of person who scrolled through everything online, always on the lookout for anything that might affect their image. The article, with its positive portrayal of Frank, was a direct hit against their narrative. It made them look like Leah Arrest. The next day, Frank was getting his mail when he saw Vanessa's Audi pull up to his curb. She got out, all sleek hair and designer sunglasses, looking like she was on her way to a jardin party rather than a confrontation with her father-in-law. Frank, she said, her voice smooth and saccharine. I am glad I caught you. We need to talk. I do not think we have anything to talk about. Vanessa. Please, Frank. For the sake of the children. They missed their grandfather. Frank's heart clenched. That was a low blow, and she knew it. Is that so? Then why have I not seen them in 6 months? That has been a mistake. Derek and I have been under a lot of stress. We have been thinking about the future, about making sure the family is secure. You know how it is. No, I do not. Please explain it to me. She sighed, a dramatic sound. Look, Frank, this whole thing, the lawsuit, the publicity, it is going to hurt everyone. It is going to hurt you too. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Are you sure you want to put your grandchildren through this? They are going to be the ones who suffer. Frank looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the fear behind the expensive sunglasses, the desperation in her rigid posture. She was not there to reconcile. She was there to intimidate him, to guilt him into backing down. She was trying to use the only leverage she had left, his love for his grandchildren. Vanessa, he said, his voice soft. You had your chance. You both did. I gave you an option. A way to make this right without all this ugliness. You chose to threaten me. You chose to lie about me to everyone we know. You made this war, not me. I am just finishing it. She stepped closer. What do you want? What would it take for you to drop this? Frank met her gaze. I want my wife's money back. I want an apology. I want to see my grandchildren. I want to be treated like a human being, not a cash machine. And I am going to get it, one way or another. Her face hardened. You will be sorry for this, Frank. You will be all alone, and you will have no one to blame but yourself. Maybe, Frank said, shrugging. But at least I will be alone with my conscience. She read at him for a long moment, then spun on her heel, got back in her car, and drove away, tires squealing. Frank watched her go, a feeling of grim satisfaction settling in his chest. She was right about one thing. He might end up alone. But he would rather be alone with his integrity than surrounded by people who saw him as a mark. He walked back inside, his steps steady. He had weathered the first real assault. He knew there would be more. But for the first time in a decade, he felt like he was in control. He was not the victim anymore. He was the architect of his own future, and he was building it with the same and precision he brought to his woodworking. The war had begun, and Frank Calder was finally ready to win it. The legal battle was grinding slowly, but the war of public opinion was going Frank's way. The article in the newspaper had a ripple effect. People in the community route recognizing him at the grocery store, the coffee shop. They would stop and compliment his work, or just say a kind word. He became a bit of a local celebrity. A minor one, but a celebrity nonetheless. Then, an unexpected opportunity landed in his lap. A wealthy businessman from the city, a man who was known for his philanthropy, saw the article. He was an avid collector of American folk art, and he was captivated by Frank's story. He called the senior center and asked to meet with him. Frank was hesitant. He did not like the idea of being put on display, of being sold. But CLARA convinced him. Frank, the man has a foundation. He funds artists. This could be a big deal for you. The meeting was in a quiet, upscale cafe in the city. The businessman, a distinguished man in his late 60s named H.A. Risen, was warm and direct. He told Frank he was moved by his story, by the elegance of his work, and by the quiet dignity of his struggle. He did not know about the family fight, of course. He just saw the ART. Frank did not volunteer the information. H.A. Risen offered Frank a commission. He wanted a custom-made dining table for his lake house. He offered a sum of money that made Frank's eyes widen. It was more than he made in a year from his usual sales. It was a life-changing amount that Frank accepted, shaking H.A. Risen's hand with a firm grip. The project would take months, but Frank was a patient man. He had time. The real storm broke a few weeks later. Frank's lawyer, Miriam, had been working quietly with the authorities. She had discovered that Derek, in his desperation, had committed a serious crime. He had tried to use Frank's social security number to open a new line of credit, a fraudulent move that was a federal offense. It was a stupid, reckless act of a cornered man. Miriam had the evidence. She showed it to Frank. This is it, she said. This is the silver bullet. We can press charges. Frank looked at the documentation, his expression unreadable. He thought about his son, the boy he had taught to ride a bike, the boy who had held his hand on his first day of kindergarten. He thought about Eleanor, about how devastated she would be. He took a deep breath. Do it. He said. The police were at Derek's development within the week. They questioned him, seized his computers, and gave him a formal notice of investigation. It was a public spectacle. The neighbors saw the patrol cars, the officers with their serious faces. It was exactly what Derek and Vanessa had always read most, the destruction of their fully constructed image. The news spread like wildfire. The country club crowd, the same people who had nodded at Derek's jokes and admired his car, turned their backs on him. His successful business contacts evaporated. He was an EMBA harassment. In desperation, Derek came crawling back to Frank. He called, he emailed, he left frantic voicemails. Dad, please, you have to stop this. You cannot do this to me. I am your son. I will do anything. I will pay you back. I will apologize to the whole world. Just please, make it stop. Frank listened to one of his messages, his heart heavy. The desperation in his son's voice was palpable, but it was too late. The damage was done. The trust, the love, the respect, it was gone. I told you, Derek, he said, in the one short phone call he allowed himself. I gave you a chance. You chose to fight. Now you live with the consequences. The consequences were swift. Derek's business collapsed. His credit was ruined. He was forced to sell his house. the one with the red tile roof and the 3A RGA rage at a loss. Vanessa, the self-proclaimed queen of the suburbs, had to get a job at a real estate agency, a step down that she found utterly mortifying. The private school for the children was gone. They were enrolled in the local public school, a place they had always looked down on. Frank watched it all unfold from the quiet of his bungalow, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. There was no joy in this. There was a deep, abiding sorrow. His son had destroyed his own life. His daughter-in-law's selfishness had finally caught up with her, but there was also a sense of justice. He felt a quiet vindication. The lies had been exposed. The truth had finally come to light. And Frank, the man they had dismissed as a useless old fool, had been the one to wield the light that the trial was a quiet affair. Frank testified, calmly and without malice. He simply told the truth. The jury, composed mostly of people his own age and older, listened intently and delivered a guilty verdict. Derek was convicted of fraud and sentenced to a short prison term, followed by a long period of probation and restitution. Frank walked out of the courthouse a free man, his head held high. He saw Vanessa in the hallway, her face a mask of bitterness and defeat. She tried to speak to him, but he walked past her. The bank statements, the texts, the whole ugly truth was a matter of public record. Derek's name was mud. The shame of his betrayal followed him everywhere. A few weeks after the trial, Frank received a letter from his son. It was written on plain paper, the handwriting shaky and uneven. Derek apologized. He did not make excuses. He did not blame his father. He simply said he was sorry, that he had been weak and greedy, and that he had ruined everything that mattered. He said he hoped that one day, Frank might find it in his heart to forgive him. Frank read the letter 3 times. He folded it carefully and put it in his desk drawer, next to the framed photograph of Eleanor. He did not write back. He was not ready for that. Maybe he never would be. But he felt a small crack in the wall of ice that had formed around his heart. Forgiveness was a long way off, but the possibility of it, however faint, was there. He also received a phone call from his granddaughter, a shy, sweet girl named Lily. She was 9 years old. She told him she missed him. She told him she had seen his picture in the newspaper and thought he looked like a famous artist. She asked if he could teach her how to see a of wood. Frank's voice caught in his throat. Of course, sweet he said. I would love to teach you. They made plans for her to visit the following weekend. It was a small step, but it was a step. Frank felt a warmth spread through his chest that he had not felt in a long time. The future, once so bleak and lonely, suddenly held a glimmer of hope. He returned to his workshop with a new energy. The cradle for Cla Ra's granddaughter was finished, and it was perfect. He had poured his heart into it, every curve and joint a testament to his skill and his resilience. Clara came by to see it, and she wept with joy. Frank, she said, hugging him tightly. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Frank smiled, a genuine, full smile. It was good to be appreciated. It was good to be seen. He was no longer the invisible man, the old fool in the corner. He was a man of substance, a man of talent, a man of quiet strength. The war had been brutal, but he had emerged from it stronger than ever. The tables had turned, and they had turned in his favor. A full year had passed since the trial. The dust had settled, and the sharp edges of the betrayal had begun to dull into a manageable ache. Frank Calder no longer woke up in the middle of the night with his heart pounding, replaying the numbers on those bank statements. He still thought about Eleanor every day, but the pain of her memory was no longer tangled up with the bitterness of what their son had done. Time, as it always did, had worked its quiet alchemy. Frank's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. The commission from H.A. Risen had opened doors he had not known existed. The dining table he had crafted for the lake house was so well received that H.A. Risen had commissioned 2 more pieces, and he had introduced Frank to a circle of collectors who valued authenticity and craftsmanship above all else. Frank's work was now featured in a gallery in the city, and his pieces sold for prices that made him shake his head in disbelief. He had become, much to his own surprise, a sought-after artisan. The man from the woods, as he was still called, had built a reputation that extended far beyond the small town where he lived. He had also become something of a local hero. The story of his quiet fight against his own son had spread, and people admired his dignity and his restraint. He received letters from strangers, men and women his age, who Shah read their own stories of betrayal and disappointment. He answered every one of them, offering words of encouragement and a listening ear. He had become a symbol of resilience, proof that it was never too late to stand up for yourself. The senior center had become his second home. He spent most of his days in the workshop, but he also taught classes now. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, a small group of eager students gathered around his workbench, Leah learning the basics of woodworking. Some were retirees looking for a hobby. Others were young people who had seen his work online and wanted to learn from a master. Frank was patient and kind, a natural teacher. He found joy in passing on his skills, in watching his students grow and create something beautiful with their own hands. One of his most dedicated students was his granddaughter, Lily. She had kept her promise, and she visited him every other weekend. She was a natural, her small hands steady and her eye for detail sharp. Frank taught her how to sand, how to curve, how to finish a piece so that the wood grain shone like liquid gold. She was a quiet girl, thoughtful and observant, and she reminded him so much of Eleanor that it sometimes took his breath away. Their relationship had blossomed into something deep and meaningful. Lily talked to him about school, about her friends, about her dreams. She told him she wanted to be an architect, to design houses that people would love to live in. Frank listened, offered advice when she asked for it, and encouraged her every step of the way. He was the grandfather he had always wanted to be, the one he had been denied for so many years. Derek had been released from prison 6 months ago. He had served his time and was now living in a small apartment on the other side of town, working a job that barely paid the bills. He had lost everything: his house, his business, his reputation, his family. Vanessa had divorced him shortly after his conviction. She had moved back to her parents' house in another state, taking the children with her. Lily, however, had begged to stay with her father. She loved him, despite everything, and she refused to abandon him. It was a decision that Frank respected, even if he did not fully understand it. Frank had seen Derek a few times, always by accident, at the grocery store or the RDWA store. They had exchanged awkward nods, nothing more. Frank was not ready for a conversation, and he suspected Derek was not either. But the anger had faded. In its place was a deep, bone-tired sadness. His son had thrown away everything that mattered, and for what a few years of living beyond his means, a few moments of feeling important. It was a tragedy, plain and simple. On a crisp autumn morning, Frank received a letter from Derek. It was the first one since the trial. He opened it with trembling hands, not sure what to expect. The letter was brief, just a few paragraphs, but it was heartfelt. Derek wrote that he was trying to rebuild his life, that he was seeing a therapist, that he was working hard to understand why he had done what he had done. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for anything. He just wanted his father to know that he was sorry, truly sorry, and that he hoped one day they might be able to talk. Frank read the letter 3 times, the same way he had read the first one. He folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer, next to the photograph of Eleanor. He did not write back, but he did not throw it away either. A few weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, Frank was sitting on his porch, enjoying the sun and the quiet stillness of the neighborhood. He was reading a Western novel, one of his favorites, when he heard a car pull into the driveway. He looked up and saw Derek's old sedan, battered and dusty, parked behind his pickup truck. Derek got out of the car slowly. He looked older, thinner, his face lined with worry and regret. He was wearing a simple plaid shirt and jeans, a far cry from the expensive suits he had once worn. He walked up the path to the porch, his steps hesitant, his eyes downcast. Dad, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Can I talk to you? Frank set down his book. He studied his son for a long moment, taking in the changes, the weariness, the humility that had replaced the old arrogance. He felt a flicker of something, not quite forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of it. Come in, he said, his voice steady. I was just about to put on some coffee. Derek nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He followed his father into the house, the same house he had once dismissed as too small, too modest, too ordinary. He looked around at the simple furnishings, the worn room chair, the framed photographs on the wall. He stopped in front of one, a picture of Eleanor holding him as a baby, her face radiant with love. I miss her, Dad, he said, his voice cracking. I miss her every day. Frank stood beside him, looking at the photograph. I know, son. I miss her too. They stood there in silence, two men united by grief and loss and the complicated tangle of their Shah-Red history. It was not a happy reunion, not by any stretch. There was too much pain, too many wounds that had not yet healed. But it was a beginning. A fragile, uncertain beginning. Frank poured 2 cups of coffee, and they sat at the small kitchen table. They talked for hours, about small things at first, the weather, the Jardin, the state of the world. Then, slowly, they talked about the big things. Derek spoke about his time in prison, about the shame and the regret, about the therapy sessions that had forced him to confront the man he had become. Frank spoke about his own journey, about the anger and the sorrow, about the slow process of rebuilding his life. We have a long way to go, Frank said finally. A long, long way. I know, Dad. But I am willing to try. If you agree. Frank looked at his son, the boy he had raised, the man who had broken his heart. He thought about Eleanor, about what she would have wanted. She had always believed in second chances. She had always believed in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. I am willing to try, Frank said. But it is going to take time. Derek nodded. I have time, Dad. I have nothing but time. They finished their coffee, and Derek left. Frank watched him drive away, his old sedan Desapé ring around the corner. He went back inside, stood in the middle of the living room, and let out a long, slow breath. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it did not look quite so lonely. He walked into his study and opened the drawer where he kept Eleanor's photograph and Derek's letters. He took out the latest letter and read it one more time. Then he picked up a pen and wrote a brief reply. It was not a letter of forgiveness, not yet. It was a letter of acknowledgement, a letter that said he had received the message and that he appreciated the effort. It was a small step, but it was a step. Frank sealed the envelope, addressed it to his son, and put it in the mail. Then he walked back to his workshop, where a new piece of wood was waiting for him. He ran his hand over the smooth surface, feeling the grain, the potential, the promise of something beautiful yet to be created. He had a new project in mind, a rocking chair for his porch, something to enjoy in the years ahead. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the workshop. Frank picked up his tools and began to work. The rhythm of the lathe, the smell of sawdust, the quiet satisfaction of creating something with his own hands, it was all still there. He had lost so much, but he had found so much more. He had found his strength, his purpose, and his voice. The old man in the corner was gone. In his place was a man who had faced the worst that life could throw at him and had emerged stronger, wiser, and at peace. He had not sought revenge, only justice. He had not wanted to destroy his son, only to expose the truth. And in the end, the truth had set them both free. Frank Calder smiled as he worked, the sound of his lathe filling the quiet workshop. The future was bright, and he was ready for it. He had reneged every moment of the happiness that lay ahead. If you have enjoyed Frank's story, please consider subscribing to my channel or newsletter for more tales of resilience, justice, and the quiet victories that make life worth living. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue to share stories like this one. Thank you for reading, and I hope to see you again soon.